Will you turn in your Bibles with me to 2 Samuel, book of 2 Samuel, chapter 20. 2 Samuel chapter 20. If you've made it to the wisdom literature, you've gone too far. If you're still in the Torah, keep going. 2 Samuel chapter 20. And for your hearing, I'm going to read verse 3. But if you're a note taker, I want you to write this down for when you go home. 2 Samuel chapter 15, verse 16. Read that when you get home. And 2 Samuel chapter 16, verses 20 to 22. If it is your custom, we ask that you would stand for the reading and hearing of God's word. Stand as you are able. I'm going to read 2 Samuel chapter 20, verse 3. Pray with me. Speak, O Lord, for your servants are listening. In the powerful and perfect name of Jesus, who is the Christ, we pray. Amen. David came to his house at Jerusalem, and the king took the 10 concubines, somebody say 10 concubines, whom he had left to look after the house. He left them, y'all, and put them in a house under guard, and provided for them, but did not go into them. So they were shut up until the day of their death, living as if in widowhood. You may be seated in the presence of the Lord. And on this glorious Saturday afternoon, with all of you glorious women of spirit and faith, I want to preach from the subject, God's rewrite. God's rewrite. In her prolific literary work, Their Eyes Were Watching God, Zora Neale Hurston writes, "The nigger woman is the mule of the world, so far as I can see." And on this Women's Day, I just want to raise the question, have you ever been treated like a mule? Have you ever been treated like a mule? Expected to shoulder other people's burdens? Mule. Expected to carry other people's responsibilities? Mule. Expected to be patient with other people's foolishness? Mule. Valued for your strength for the benefit of other folks? Mule. Valued for your endurance for the benefit of others? Mule. Valued for the commodification of your body? Mule. Not black male, nor white woman, but othered, and therefore not human. Mule. Have you ever been treated like a mule? I have. And if you are a black woman in these United States, then at some point or another, you know what it feels like to be treated like a mule. And I suspect that the 10 women in 2 Samuel chapter 20, verse 3 also knew what it felt like to be treated like mules. In our text for today, we meet 10 women. Although not mentioned in the text, they were women with names, women with outstanding gifts, and women with boundless dreams. They were women with kind eyes and bright smiles and generous hearts. Brenda, Elvira, Shanita, Pearl, Tasha, Nazia, Belinda, Paula, Esther, Reverend Kimberly. They were women like you and like me. They wore red lipstick and red pumps. They spritzed Chanel No. 5 before they left the house. They laughed loudly, come on somebody, and they loved hard. Yet, they were women who were reduced to the term concubine, an occupation thrust on them by royal right. The text does not tell us who these women were before others named them and claimed them. All we know is that they were King David's concubines. Concubines were common in ancient Israel. They were understood to be inferior, beneath wives, virtually slaves, and objects secured for man, mule. In many ways, these 10 women appear to be an afterthought in the text. But I don't buy into the notion that they were an afterthought just because David said so. They were somebody. I'm not going to value them based on a male hegemonic system that never had their well-being in mind. I'm not going to label them based on a system that did not recognize their personhood. I'm not going to see them through the lens of a system that diminished them to object status. They were women. They were women. They were women. And I know I'm just getting started, but can I make a request this morning? Can we stop valuing Black women based on a flawed system that never had our well-being in mind in the first place? Can we stop labeling Black women fast, loose, hot, thought, ho, Jezebel, and the like, subscribing to a faulty system that does not value our personhood? Can we stop seeing Black women through a lens that diminishes us and makes us sources of sex and labor solely for the consumption of men? I agree with womanist and feminist theology, which articulates that we are not an afterthought, my sisters. We are women. We are women deemed worthy by God to be loved, to be respected, and to be valued simply because we exist. We are women. Call us by our names. At the time we encounter these 10 women in the text, they have been through hell because of the value based on their lives, based on the voracious appetite of no-count King David, his no-count son Absalom, and Absalom's no-count advisor, Ahithophel. Now I know, for many of you, it is blasphemous and heretical for me to talk about David like this. And I love David, but we give David too many passes because boys will be boys and because he was called a man after God's own heart. But if you read the record and you assess David's behavior, you know that he also ate women alive just because he could. He had an appetite that was fed by patriarchy, a system where men wield power and women are excluded. And so in 2 Samuel chapter 15, we meet these 10 women for the first time. They have been abandoned and left behind to tend the palace. Can you imagine being left behind with 9 other sisters to clean over 19 staterooms, 188 bedrooms, 92 offices, and 78 bedrooms? I barely want to clean my little house I got now. But I'm sure David's palace rivaled Buckingham Palace, and King David left these women behind for labor, knowing full well that they could have been overtaken, destroyed, and even killed. They were collateral damage in David's family and political drama. And just as he suspected, the palace was not safe. In chapter 16, under the precipitous advisement of Ahithophel, David's power-hungry son Absalom stormed the palace, and he raped these women as a political act to claim jurisdiction over Israel from his father. To add insult to injury, he streamed the whole thing live on Facebook for all of Israel to see. And then he shamed them and bragged about grabbing them by the... If that wasn't enough, it's recorded in our text that when David returns, he moves them to a palace, from the palace to a house under guard. And the text tells us that he provides for them, but he does not have intimate contact with them. Womanist Hebrew Bible scholar Wilda Gaffney, in her work Womanist Midrash, describes their situation as a living death. I wonder how many of us in here are living in a living death. I read the commentaries praising David because at least he came back for them. At least he fed them. At least he clothed them. At least you have a job. At least he married you. At least he doesn't beat you. Y'all know that the words "at least" has kept many black women suffering and shrieking and gasping for air where there was none. And so, my sisters, we have to call their behavior what it is. Patriarchy and toxic masculinity. These women were used as forced labor. These women were used as sexual property. These women were imprisoned, given 3 hots and a cot. And the text tells us that they lived like widows until they died. When an autopsy was performed on these 10 women, the report showed that they died of asphyxiation and sepsis. The autopsy report showed that they were strangled by patriarchy and poisoned by toxic masculinity, with the secondary cause of death being abandonment, deep trauma, and unfulfilled potential. Sounds familiar. Patriarchy is still trying to kill us today. Clark Atlanta University student Alexis Crawford, who was choked to death by her roommate's boyfriend, is proof that patriarchy is not just trying to kill us, but patriarchy is killing us. Black women are valued as labor and sexual commodities, strangled by patriarchy and poisoned by toxic masculinity, just like the women in the text. And I believe that if we can name the fact that patriarchy killed these women, then maybe we can soberly address how patriarchy is still trying to kill us every day. Can we call out the systems that seek to devalue, dehumanize, and detain Black women? Can we talk about how Black women are earning college degrees at astronomical rates, yet earn 61 cents on the dollar that every white man makes? Can we talk about the disparities in Black maternal health? We are literally dying as we are giving birth to our babies. Can we talk about how Black women, particularly Black single mothers, are blamed for the demise of everything? It started with Reagan and it still continues today. Can we talk about how Black women are being called by God, yet churches are still not considering Black women to fill pastoral vacancies? And y'all know talk is cheap, right? So can we talk about it and then advocate for and implement public policies that support Black women so we don't die a living death like the women in the text? I don't know about you, but I'm not going to let patriarchy kill me. Tell your sister, I'm not going to let patriarchy kill me. I'm not going to let patriarchy kill me. And so that was my first point. Patriarchy killed the 10 women in the text. And although patriarchy killed them, there is something redemptive in this text. As I meditated on the life of these women, I asked the question, how in the world did they make it as long as they did, living in confinement? And the answer to my question was right there in the Bible. And so the second point I want to make is that these sisters survived for as long as they did because they stuck together. They stuck together. These 10 women were mentioned 3 times in 2 Samuel. Each time we hear about these 10 women, they were together. And I was preparing the message, I started to call them Decca Kappa Decca because they were a sorority of 10. A bright sisterhood shining in a bleak situation. Decca is the Greek word for 10, and Kappa is the 10th letter of the Greek alphabet and signifies the 10th letter, the 10th star in a constellation. Decca Kappa Decca. I don't know what colors they were wearing. They could have been in pink and green. Could have been crimson and cream. Could have been royal blue and gold. Could have been royal blue and white. And I have some of my Black Girls Run sisters here in the house. Could have been pink and black. But what I do know is that amid their suffering, they also had a shared hope. Don't miss this. Their sisterhood kept them alive. Is there anybody here who can testify to the fact that there is power when Black women stand together? There is power when Black women have each other's backs. There is power when Black women hold each other down and lift each other up. I am here today because of Black women. I can testify to the magic that happens when Black women hold each other up. I was glad to see the life-giving relationship of Black women after the U.S. Open match this summer. Did y'all see it? Did you see when Naomi Osaka consoled, encouraged, and invited Coco Gauff to be part of her post-match interview? When you read the headlines, the world called it a lesson in humility and sportsmanship. But can we call it what it is? What we saw was the beauty and power of one Black woman sticking by the side of another Black woman in a moment of vulnerability. And I believe it was that same kind of love ethic, that same compassion, and that same support between the 10 women in the text that kept them alive. And so what this text says to me is that we have to have some supportive sisters in our lives. In her book, Eloquent Rage, Brittany Cooper writes, "Friendships with Black girls have always saved my life." And I want to declare today that God has gifted Black women to other Black women as life support. Patriarchy tries to kill us, but when we love each other, when we support each other, when we show up for each other, there is life. Can you imagine the conversations in that house? Sister, I believe you. Sister, this never should have happened to you. Sister, this is not the will of God for your life. Sister, this is not your fault. Sister, God cares about what happens to you. Sister, we're going to make it. Sister, you're not alone. I have your back. Are there any sisters in here today who can testify that you are living because God sent a sister to you right when you needed her? But it's not enough to have sisters who will have your back. You have to be a supportive sister. Decca Kappa Decca worked because they were all in. They understood that what happened to one happened to all. They had a sisterhood where they could weep together and rejoice together. Women of spirit and faith, we need a sisterhood based on reciprocity. on mutuality, on solidarity. We need a sisterhood where I can depend on you and you can depend on me. Can I say this? It's about to be 2020. One-sided relationships are played out. These 10 women demonstrate that you have to be a no matter what kind of sister. I dare you to be a no matter what kind of sister. Be a sister who shows up no matter what. Be a sister who comforts another sister. Be a sister who shows up for another sister. Be a sister who speaks out for another sister. Be a sister who stands up for another sister. Be a sister who stops talking for a moment and listens to another sister. Be a sister who cooks a meal for another sister when she is bone tired. Be a sister who supports the personal dreams and professional aspirations of another sister, especially when they're in a male-dominated field. Be a sister who is mindful of another sister as you vote for your elected officials. Be a sister who tarries with another sister through miscarriage, through divorce, through the death of a loved one, through the loss of a job, through the loss of a home, or through caring for an aging parent. Be a sister who is committed to the survival and thriving of another black woman, no matter what. Decca Kappa Decca shows us that there is life when you show up for your sisters, no matter what. And so we dealt with the fact that patriarchy killed the 10 women of Decca Kappa Decca. We affirmed the fact that they survived for as long as they did because of the God-given power of sisterhood. And finally, I want to suggest that the fate of these women need not be repeated if we use our prophetic imagination to rewrite a new ending for these women today. In Prophetic Imagination, Walter Brueggemann writes, the task of prophetic ministry is to nurture, nourish, and evoke a consciousness and a perception alternative to the consciousness and perception of the dominant culture around us. In other words, despite what we see, and despite who thinks they're in control, our theology reminds us that there is more to this than what we see, and the powers that be are no match for our sovereign God. This prophetic imagination arouses an awareness in us that at any moment God can and God will rewrite the ending of any story. This prophetic imagination was at work in the life of Harriet Tubman. Did y'all see Harriet? Yeah. I'm not going to spoil the movie for those of you who haven't seen it. Go see it. But what I will say is that every time she was told no, every time she was told it was too dangerous, every time she came up against an obstacle, she listened for the voice of God and she kept going. The dominant culture told Decca Kappa Decca that they were mules. But today, when we see women suffering, we need to proclaim black girl magic. What can help black suffering women out of bed each and every day, week after week, month after month, and year after year is the same thing that stirred Harriet Tubman to make 19 trips to rescue over 300 enslaved black people to freedom. Knowing and believing that the dominant culture does not get to write the script because we serve a God who is the author and the finisher of our faith. God rewrites the ending. Every time a black woman does what they think we can't do, says what they think we shouldn't say, and goes where they think we shouldn't go. I gotta say that again. God rewrites the ending. Every time a black woman does what they think we shouldn't do, says what they think we shouldn't shouldn't say and goes where they think we shouldn't go. God can and God will rewrite the ending. There was an assignment in ninth grade English. It wasn't that far back. It was assignment. It's closer for some of us. Some of y'all said that was way back. There was an assignment in ninth grade English where after reading a novel, our teacher would ask us to consider the story and then rewrite the ending. We would have to consider questions like what's in the character's future? What do you need to remind the reader about? What is the final feeling you want to leave the reader with? And I love this assignment, partly because I was a nerd, but also because it gave me the freedom to imagine the possibilities for a character, especially when I didn't like the ending to the story. And I have to confess, sisters, this was and is a very difficult text. I didn't like the ending for the women of Decca Kappa Decca. I wrestled with God about this one. I questioned God. I said, God, why was their hope cut off while David went on to fight another fight, sing another song, and pray another prayer? God, why did their stories have to end this way? God, how could you allow these 10 women to die such a tragic death? And I heard the voice of God say, I hear you, Donna. Why don't you rewrite the ending for the 10 women of Decca Kappa Decca? And so here's the Donna Olivia Owusu-Ansah version of 2 Samuel chapter 20, verse 3. David came to the house at Jerusalem, and the king sat down with the 10 concubines who he had left to look after the house. They told their story of everything that happened. Some whispered, some screamed, some wept and rocked without saying a word. David heard their account of what happened to them, believed them, and fell to his knees and apologized from the depths of his soul for his part of what happened to them as a result of his negligence. David asked them what they needed to feel secure, to feel whole, and to feel loved. And these 10 women told King David everything that they needed. So David brought Absalom to justice. David implemented policies in all of Israel that enforced the agency of women over their own bodies. David retroactively paid the women for their time and their labor. David paid for their health care, including a trauma counselor, because you can have Jesus and go to therapy. And then David invested in each woman's dream. And so Brenda led a thriving Christian education department that transformed the lives of God's people. And Elvira trained and activated dancers who shared the gospel and movement throughout the world. Shanita graduated from college, completed a master's degree, and went on to get her PhD. Pearl developed her leadership skills through mentoring and went on to mentor young people far and wide. Tasha led workshops for women on how to parent with grace and strength and dedication. Naziah followed her dreams and took the world by storm. Belinda defied the medical odds and continued to give God praise. Paula started a new business that transformed the community. Esther started a ministry to help people maintain their faith and their fire while recovering from personal crisis. And Reverend Kimberly became a sought-after preacher and a best-selling author. And they continued to support one another and live abundantly and thriving and helping other women until they took their last breaths. But sisters, the good news for you and me today is that we don't have to reimagine God rewriting our ending, because it's already so. God is rewriting endings in every area and aspect of our lives. But the thing is, God is calling us to be contributors to the text of our own lives. When we demand equal pay for Black women, we are rewriting our stories with God. When we vote for leaders who create and enforce policies that promote the well-being of Black women, we are rewriting our stories with God. When we advocate for equitable hiring practices, we are rewriting our stories with God. When we create spaces like these for Black women to be vulnerable and to experience joy and radical love, we are rewriting our stories with God. When we call women deacons, women trustees, and women pastors, we are rewriting our stories with God. When we mentor a Black girl and help her see the possibilities of her life, we are rewriting our stories with God. When we require healthcare professionals to address the implicit and explicit bias against Black women during medical treatment, we are rewriting our stories with God. We must do the work individually and collectively, locally and globally on behalf of Black women and girls. God is giving us a pen in our voices and in our votes to collaborate with God as God rewrites the ending of our stories to one of blessings, one of life, one of wholeness, and one of freedom. And so, women of spirit and faith, my time is almost up. But before I take my seat, can I bless you one more time? Women of spirit and faith, patriarchy ain't gonna kill us. Women of spirit and faith, we have each other. Women of spirit and faith, our stories don't have to end in death, because we have a God-given imagination and an unwavering faith that God can and God will rewrite the endings to our stories. And so with God, our stories end in hope. With God, our stories end in peace. With God, our stories end in joy. With God, our stories end in life. With God, our stories end in grace. With God, our stories end in freedom. With God, our stories end in victory. Ask me how I know. Because they thought they had my Jesus. They devalued Jesus when they put him on trial. And they dehumanized Jesus when they put him on an old rugged cross. And they detained my Jesus in a borrowed tomb. And it looked like the story was over. It looked like the story had ended. But early on Sunday morning, God rewrote the ending, and he got up with all power in his hands. So is there anybody here who's going to praise God for the rewrite? Praise God for the rewrite. Praise God for the rewrite. I dare you to grab a sister and praise God for the rewrite. Get you a partner and praise God for the rewrite. Praise God for the rewrite in this nation. Praise God for the rewrite in your home. Praise God for the rewrite in your community. Praise God for the rewrite in your family. Praise God for the rewrite in this nation. Praise God for the rewrite in your health. Praise God for the rewrite in your finances. Praise God for the rewrite in your life. Praise God for the rewrite in your sister's life. Because is there anybody here who knows that it ain't over until God says it's over? It ain't over until God says it's done. Praise God. Praise God. Praise God. Praise God. Praise God. God is rewriting your life. Hallelujah. 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 As as you have breath in your body, God can rewrite your story. And so it ain't over until God says it's over. And it ain't over until God says it's done. Give God some praise for the rewrite.